All right, everybody's starting to trickle in now, I see. Welcome back this afternoon to the 2025 Invasive Species Forum. Excited to get started this afternoon. I have here with me Leigh Greenwood, and she's going to be our keynote speaker today. I'm just going to give everybody another to trickle in before I do your introduction, because I don't want anybody to miss it. All right. So Leigh's presentation this morning, we're really excited to have her talk. She's the director of the Nature Conservancy's Forest Pest and Pathogen Program, which sits within the North America Natural Climate Solutions team. Leigh works to bring partners together to achieve common goals in support of forest health from the forest pest and pathogen perspective. Her projects include managing the Don't Move Firewood campaign, convening the Continental Dialogue on Non-Native Forest Insects and Diseases, working to improve international biosecurity measures in place for solid wood packaging, and leading partnership efforts to accelerate the development of pest and pathogen-resistant native trees. Leigh's leadership of the Don't Move Firewood campaign has led to its being widely regarded as one of the most innovative public outreach arms of the Nature Conservancy. Leigh earned her BA in biology at Williams College and her master's in wildlife biology at the University of Montana in Missoula, where she studied the intersection of native wildlife, invasive plants, and biological control insects. Originally from New York State, Leigh's work as a biological technician prior to graduate school took her across the United States, including stints in Puerto Rico, New Mexico, Arizona, Idaho, Wyoming, and eventually her now home state of Montana. I was excited to be able to meet Leigh in her home state of Montana earlier in the fall last year at the Continental Dialogue on Non-Native Forest Insects and Diseases. And got to experience her leadership there. And we're very excited to have you talk about your new work. I'll let you take it away from here.
Fantastic. Thanks, Mackenzie. It's always amazing to actually meet people in person. It was such a privilege to have so many people in Montana this past fall. So let me just focus on getting this into display mode. I have this quirk with my Zoom that it wants to show subtitles, and then I have to turn it off because it's really distracting. Mackenzie, are the subtitles turned off right now?
I believe so. It looks good to me.
Okay, yeah, you'd be seeing them, which is pretty funny. So thanks everybody for having me. It's so exciting to be the keynote presentation for such an amazing group of people. I was watching the numbers tick up, and when I last had the window open, it said 163 people are on this presentation, which is pretty cool. I'm sure by the time everybody runs back from their coffee or lunch or bathroom break or taking their dog for a walk, there'll be more. So I also am really excited about the opportunity to dig deep within this presentation and actually spend some time giving background and trying to not rush, which is such an amazing thing during, the professional mode of all of our lives. So let's get to it. The name of the publication that the Invasive Species Center asked me to present on is Catching Invasives with Curiosity: The Importance of Passive Surveillance Systems for Invasive Forest Pest Detection. And we spent the last 2.5 hours together in a virtual space for all of you who have already been logged on, talking about various types of community engagement and surveillance systems, reporting systems, apps, data collection through things like Google Docs and so forth. And we'll get to all of that. But first, let's get to something else. Well, actually, let's first start with something else entirely. I just wanted to recognize my two co-authors. Dr. Amanda Rowe is the first author of this paper. She's with Natural Resources Canada. For all I know, she's on the webinar. Hi, Amanda, if you're there. And then Dr. David Coyle, who is with Clemson University and also a forest pest specialist down in the southeastern United States. I currently live in Montana, like Mackenzie mentioned, so we represent a lot of different regions and a lot of different norms across North America. And it was a huge cross-border research and partnership success to put this publication out fairly quickly, as well as I think it's a great final product, of course. Okay, so first I'm going to set the stage for my entire premise of why this paper actually is important. I had the huge privilege about a month and a half ago to go to one of the most remote places I've certainly ever been, the island of Guam, which is approximately, 4 to 6 hours, now I'm forgetting, south of Tokyo and quite a bit north of Australia. And that's pretty much the closest things to it in terms of major land masses. So this is really a piece of the Pacific that I knew very, very, very little about. And I had to go there for work, which was amazing. And I took a lot of pictures like this, me all blissed out in the tropical sunshine, beautiful hillsides that are actually colonized by a wide variety of invasive species I don't know the names of. And then a really cool national wildlife refuge up on one of the tips of the island that has this gorgeous overlook that's just filled with butterflies. Now, when you go somewhere new and exciting, you probably also take a lot of pictures like this, which is important and good and fun and amazing and handy for PowerPoints when you need them. But you all however many people who are currently on this, 226 and counting, I'm writing that down. You all probably also take pictures like this. So that's a moth I saw. I don't know what it was. It was really big though, like way bigger than I thought. That thing's bigger than my thumb. And then I saw this cool gecko in a parking garage that was like tucked up behind a fire alarm. And I was like, whoa, I've never seen a gecko like that. So I took a picture of it. And then on the far right, shout out to Montreal. This picture is a picture my sister took while she and I were enjoying the day together in Montreal. She doesn't live that far away down in Massachusetts, and I had to go to Montreal for work. And she and I spent the day enjoying Montreal together. And she has this longtime hobby of taking pictures of me while I'm taking pictures of bugs and then laughing about them and putting them on Facebook. And I think it's hilarious. She thinks it's hilarious. Here's a classic example. And if you look closely in my smartphone screen, which is actually pretty well captured in the photograph, you'll notice there's a good sized kind of black fuzzy caterpillar I'm taking a picture of because I'm excited about it. You all do this. We all do this. If you don't do it exactly like this, you do it something like this, right? You are the type of person who probably gets excited about geckos on fire alarms in parking garages, which means, and I love you all very much, you're not normal. In fact, for the sake of this publication, the Curiosity publication, as a participant in the 2025 Invasive Species Forum, I would really like to remind you that we did a rough estimate of how not typical you are. And just to create the biggest possible estimate, you're within 3% of people who do things like this. And we defined that pretty unfairly, but you have to create some sort of a rule of thumb as approximately 3%. Approximately 3% of working age population people have some sort of natural resource related profession. Now, that could be virtually anything. We searched the US Bureau of Labor Statistics for people who work in logging, people who work in farming, people who work in water protection, people who work in any type of thing we could think of that had any type of natural resource connection. And when we add them all up, and it was a very generous group of people, it was still only 3%. Now, it was not readily available at the time for us to figure out a similar number for Canada. So, but you know, this is the Canadian Forum. So I looked it up, and if we're just going to wave our arms about, just so you know, the US rural population, and you're going to guess that a lot of natural resource professionals live in rural areas, is 20%. And in Canada, the Canadian rural population is estimated at 16%. So you can probably guess that it's pretty darn similar between. So we're all in North America in our headspace right now. Some of you may be coming in from other places. And about all of us fit into this 3%. And we have a blind spot. We think of people like us, but there's 97% of the rest of the world out there. I might be taking pictures on my beautiful day with my sister in Montreal of a tiny caterpillar, but that's not what the rest of the world does. And this is really borne out in our publication. And the way that we chose to relate it to our profession is to realize that it is very clearly captured in the reality of how Asian longhorn beetle has been detected through time. Of the 18 different Asian longhorn beetle detections in time and space across the last almost 30 years, 12 of them were detected by a member of the general public who just kind of stumbled upon it. They did not use a formal detection system in order to do so. And only 6 of them were actually detected by a professional or a semi-professional that would fall into that 3% group. So only 6 of them were me with my camera staring at a bug in the Montreal Botanical Garden. The rest of them were just entirely random people, members of the general public. And this is one of the single most recognizable, highly surveilled for group of insects in one of the most, a highly infrastructured populations of invasive species detectors in the world. And we're still seeing this pattern. Now I have a reminder on this big purple star in the middle of the diagram for 2013. So I will not forget to say this. 2013 represents the watershed moment where half of the American public, and I'm going to go ahead and guess Canadian too, had a smartphone. So the vast majority of these observations were pre-smartphone supremacy, and the very last one was post-smartphone supremacy, the one in Hollywood, South Carolina. All the other ones were in an era of a different type of experience for detection. Very importantly, for instance, the detection in Worcester, Massachusetts was an everyday person in their backyard. She noticed an insect that just looked really different to her. And she went to Google Images, which was in its infancy back then. But you can go into YouTube and look up a documentary that I helped create way back when about this moment. And in that moment, Donna Massey, the woman who found it, she looked at that bug, she looked at the internet, and the internet told her, call the government. She says that right in the video. So she says, okay, I'm calling the government. So she did the right thing, and she reached a hotline that enabled her to do the right thing. But it was only because this ordinary person just observed an insect in their backyard and they were really curious about what the heck was up with it. She was also nervous in this case that it might actually bite her grandkids, which it does have large mandibles. This was not an unreasonable thing to be concerned about. So the fact that it really piqued her curiosity and her emotions and so forth was what led to it being actually reported out to the systems by which you could report it at that time. So these systems have changed over time, and we're going to explore how in the changing over time, we can actually take advantage of these moments of curiosity in order to enable people to report things even though they don't even know what they're looking at. This is the most important thing. They don't know what they're seeing. And we see this with a lot of large, showy invasive species, or in the case of oak wilt, showy invasive impact, or also for elm zigzag sawfly. The ones in blue line up in that prior diagram to the general public. So elm zigzag sawfly's first point of detection, general public. Box tree moth, general public. Emerald ash borer in Vancouver, general public. Joro spider, general public. So just about half of them in our, well, actually half of them within our diagram here were first spotted by the general public. The other half were spotted by natural resource professionals adjacent. A beekeeper who found the northern giant hornet, an arborist who was concerned about damage to oak wilt, which was mentioned in a prior presentation. So those natural resource professionals or adjacent to natural resource professionals, they're able to use tools. They might actually know what an invasive species is. But for things like elm zigzag sawfly and box tree moth, those are being reported not by people who maybe even know what an invasive species is. They may not care. They just saw a cool thing on a leaf. And that moment of seeing a cool thing on a leaf is worth millions of dollars to all of us in our quest to be the best professionals we can be in managing invasive species. But the thing is that you cannot expect that everybody you encounter will understand what an invasive species is or care, or that you should try to make them understand it or make them care it. Because yes, we are all responsible for invasive species education. And yes, we are all doing our very, very best to make sure that this information is readily available, that people are excited about the natural world. But we will not be successful with every person. And on the spectrum of what gives us results now versus what gives us results in the future, what gives us results now is passive surveillance of those moments of curiosity. Passive surveillance of moments of curiosity is what is important to harness that I would like you all to think about. You may be familiar with the idea of bioblitzes. Bioblitzes are cool. They're community engagement events to record whatever biological phenomenon are in the area. They have different intents. They take place in different places. Some of them are just, for anything at all. Some of them are more focused perhaps on aquatics or terrestrials or a park, or in this case, a state forest in a particular area near Milwaukee. That's fantastic. It doesn't matter. Once they all get into iNaturalist, those reports, in this case, it's an iNaturalist-based BioBlitz event, those reports then become absolute gold, because people don't necessarily have to know what they're seeing for it to be important. So I'm going to take us back to that cool moth I saw back in January. I don't know anything about the native versus non-native moth life of the island of Guam. I'd never been that far east or west, depending on how you think about the globe. In my entire life, I had no familiarity with the local flora or fauna. I knew a couple basic things about Guam, but that was it. So I saw this huge cool moth and I was like, I genuinely have no idea even how to figure out the name of this thing. So I put it on iNaturalist. And in that moment, I was sort of back in the place of the general public. And of course, within a day or two, even though I had no idea, and I just put probably, hawk moth on the identification, some actual professional had identified it as one of the common vagrants that reaches Guam. And there's nothing to be worried about, but I didn't know that. And that moment of curiosity for me was really insightful and reminded me a lot of our paper, because it was a moment where I could have ignored that moth, but maybe it was an invasive species and I would have no way to know that. So when we talk about catching invasives with curiosity, we actually talk about a whole spectrum of invasive species reporting possibilities. And in that spectrum, there's a bunch of different dimensions, and we tried to make a figure so that we could all, because, scientists, we love figures. We tried to make a figure so that we could all represent that information in a way that we could talk about it. And the figure became very complicated, but hopefully it's useful to you all. So at the top are the different ways that you can attempt to gain information about events of information, events of a species being posted or concerned about or curious about on planet Earth. So for instance, you can go out as a professional and look for things, which you know exactly what it is. So for instance, when people went to Vancouver after the first couple finds of emerald ash borer, professionals on emerald ash borer went to Vancouver and looked for emerald ash borer damage. Species-specific surveillance that is directed. Very important, right? They probably also, you are also all aware that oftentimes when you're out and about, people talk to you. So if you're the one looking for spotted lanternfly and you're in a vest and you've got, collection materials and there's a bunch of you and there's a rig in the parking lot, people come right up to you and they talk about, oh, what are you looking for? And then they're like, oh, but I saw that on my property. And then you give them a handout. That's contact with a species-specific control program. So, it's not exactly what you're looking for, but maybe they've actually have seen it. And once it occurs to them in their head, that's a really useful moment. These are critical programs that run the world that we're in, that we should continue to support and focus on for the needs that they have. Then You have invasive reporting hotlines or online reporting tools. We've been talking quite a bit about those in the last couple hours. Oftentimes, those are iNaturalist projects, which are fantastic. One of the limitations of iNaturalist, well, okay, there's two important limitations of iNaturalist projects that I like to highlight, and I could be wrong too, because these things develop over time. Number one is that typically with iNaturalist projects, you have to ask for what you want. And so somebody has to engage with what you want. So they have to know that your project exists. They have to know that you want certain invasive species reported. And then furthermore, you have to actually go in there and perform maintenance and look at it and do things with it for it to actually work, to get engagement. So this is a pretty active process. That's not to say it's not useful. It's incredibly useful. But it takes a lot of cultivation of a community to use the project, to use it right, to create the data that you are interested in seeing. Now, we had a large discussion earlier also about hotlines, which are fantastic. I think one of the best things that Brooke mentioned during his presentation is how the hotlines not only serve their own purposes as hotlines for invasive species, but they also serve really important broad direction of information travel. Maybe somebody just needs to be heard, like Angela Gupta mentioned, that they're really upset. That information is useful to you. You know these things are having an impact. Perhaps you can use that in advocacy. Maybe they need to be sent to a different reporting area. So maybe they're actually in the next province over and they're calling the wrong hotline. Well, at least you had a moment to talk to them. So those hotlines are incredibly important. And I think that the results of them are spectacular because you can do not only reporting through those, but you can also do advocacy, response, support, knowledge gathering. You can get the pulse of the public through those. Really, really, really important. Further to the right is a commodity or resource-based tool. There's a lot of these. So like if you want to report invasive species or on different agricultural commodities, you might work with your association for your agricultural commodities. So let's just say you work on apples. There's probably like a report issues with your apples. Those things are getting, based on, in this example, the apple, but you might have somebody incidentally reporting a spotted lanternfly on your apple, even if they didn't even know what a spotted lanternfly was, why it was interesting. They just thought it was weird. They'd never seen it before. So they used their tool to report it. That's a very valuable moment. The other thing that also comes up a lot is the importance of things like extension agents and in-person community contacts. That personal contact to a community or resource-based agency is so critical. You're out there building your reliable presence, your credibility, your professionalism every day, and that's crucial. So being there and doing your work is incredibly important for the long-term cultivation of the people who are interested in either invasive species or the commodities, natural resources, trees, streams, etc., that they're interested in. All of this is important. My personal favorite is personal contact with an entomologist. That is how my sister, even though I'm not technically an entomologist, reports things. So I've got her down there at the bottom, and I think probably everybody on this webinar is really familiar with this phenomenon. You get texts, I bet, from your friends, maybe from your parents, maybe from your sister, maybe from your former colleague in a different job, maybe from your neighbor. They've got weird bugs. They've got some animal poop they've never seen before. There's something wrong with their tree. This is an underappreciated element of all of our jobs that I personally find tremendously entertaining and wonderful. When my sister sends me a picture of an animal, I am thrilled no matter what it is. And I want you all to kind of consider how much that personal contact, whether or not you're an entomologist, this paper is about forest pests, so that's why we wrote that, is really important to you and your knowledge of what people are thinking about. Now we're going to get to the actual passive elements on the far right. So biodiversity observation platforms and automated alerts. What we found as we dug into our actual scholarship within the field of curiosity-based detection is that 71% of detections in, for instance, Australia are occurring in these last two columns. All these things that I just talked about, that we just talked about, are unbelievably important, necessary, useful, cost-effective. They actually are not the majority of the detections coming in many countries and in many places. They are actually coming in from those last two. Biodiversity observation platforms such as iNaturalist are dominating this field. And people who don't know what they're looking at, but actually are a researcher or a professional, like me looking at that moth, which did happen to be native, you know, I put that stuff on iNaturalist because I don't even know whether or not I should be reporting it. That is general surveillance in the terminology of the Roger paper, and passive surveillance in the terminology of our paper. And it's some of the most important types of surveillance to harness and use professionally that you can try to find. Last but not least on this column is automated alerts. The Roger 2024 paper, which I'll get to in a minute with citation, has an automated alert system that is scraping data in an ethically and legally sound fashion off of the biodiversity observation platforms and packaging it in a way that it sends you an automated alert. This is, I think, the holy grail for your job sanity. You want somebody to email you when they found, you want a system to passively and spontaneously email you when something shows up on iNaturalist. Every time an unidentified crayfish shows up in your watershed, you don't want to have to go look for it on iNaturalist. You want an email that says unidentified crayfish added to iNaturalist. You can click onto it and be like, oh, that's a native crayfish, whatever. It just had kind of a funny molt. That's fine. And then your day goes on. But what if it wasn't a native crayfish with a funny molt? What if it is your species? And what if you had forgotten for weeks and weeks to check iNaturalist for unusual crayfish in your watershed? That difference is crucial. You need it in your inbox. You need an automated alert to harness these things and help your work sanity so that you can use passive detection better. So let's talk about a couple ways to try to do this. So this is a practical application of our work. One of the new tools that iNaturalist has built that is close but not exactly what we're talking about is called the anomaly detector. Things that are weird. Juro spider in the southeastern United States is pretty weird. It's pretty obvious. It's got big yellow stripes. It's huge. And so you can use the new anomaly detector feature within iNaturalist in order to try to help yourself figure out what weird things are showing up in iNaturalist. I should take a pause. I keep saying iNaturalist, and I don't work for them. I actually don't have any skin in the game on iNaturalist, but I do have a statistic for you all. In Canada, more than 3 million observations are being logged into iNaturalist right now every year. And iNaturalist is estimating that that's going to double every year for a few more years. In the USA, more than 3 million iNaturalist observations are being logged per month. The amount of data pouring into iNaturalist that you could use to make your work better, to make your work easier, more effective, to save natural resources is spectacular. So how do you use it right? One of the things you can do is use anomaly detector. Now, I have heard via the internet that anomaly detector doesn't work that well yet. That's okay. These things are a system in progress, right? Things don't have to be perfect for them to be useful. Perhaps if you're really excited about this program, you could provide comments to iNaturalist. They crowdsource all of their programming development programs. So you could tell them the problems you're seeing and help them fix it and make it better. This presentation will be available if you email me, and I will provide your email. I made sure to include citations for anybody who wants to operationalize any of this ideas and so forth. These URLs will be on there. Another thing that you would really want to know about if you want to get deep into the nerdy weeds is this new R statistical software. So R, which if you did statistics in any type of higher education, you may have encountered R. There is a publicly available our package on GitHub that the Australians made and recently published about, that is really cool. And that's the one I mentioned, scrapes the data off of iNaturalist as well as other sources, and then creates automatic email alerts for the things that you want to look for within set geofenced locations. So that geofenced locations could be a county, a state, whatever you want. And you create an alert, if you're capable of programming R, to you or your boss or your technician, whatever works. So I highly recommend that you take a look at the system. It works across all taxa and it works across other apps. So you don't have to limit it just to iNaturalist at all. It's just that that's where the vast majority of North American observations are coming in. In Australia, they also have like maybe 10% of their observations, or maybe it was less than that, coming in through this other app called Feral Scan, which looks for feral animals like cats and foxes and other things that are not native to Australia. And so, you know, cultural context matters. I'm not going to be looking for foxes. Foxes are native to my neighborhood, but in Australia, they're sure looking for them. The other thing that you can do, like right now, as soon as this webinar is done for the day and you're wrapping up at your desk, is you can actually set yourself up for a subscription by taxon in place within iNaturalist if you wanted to. It's really cool. And the best description of how to do it is actually for New Zealand. That's why I included the link. You just go to your iNaturalist homepage, where apparently I'm a little obsessed with slugs and snails lately, I don't know. And you kind of scroll down a bit to the bottom almost. And on the right, there's a thing that says subscriptions. And you just figure out what you want to look for. You can type in your taxa. It can be as specific you want. It can be genus and species. It can be families. It can be whatever. Same thing with your place. It could be a state, a province, a county, a city limits. There's lots of options. And then you just kind of click it and it's good to go. So like if I was really excited about beetles in Montana, where I live, I could put order Coleoptera into the taxon and place Montana and hit save. And then it's just going to email me, which would probably be pretty annoying. But if I was actually a person who was really excited about detections, super useful. Every time somebody records a new Coleoptera in the state of Montana on iNaturalist, I mean, I might be getting an email every day. That would probably be too much. So perhaps I would then adjust it so that the taxon was more specific. So it was something within Coleoptera that I was the most interested in for my research or detection needs. But that's something you could just do right now and fix it so that it was more useful to you. So here's a couple of broad generalizations to think about when you're using a passive alerts system as opposed to any type of active or directive alerts system, like a hotline, or active and alert would be like a hotline or a project, or using the EdMaps, which I'll talk about in a second because it's also really important, or like Google Docs we talked about. Don't make a new thing unless it's necessary. During the Toronto Nature Stewards presentation, they talked about how their audience needs Google Docs versions for accessibility. That's a great example of when it's completely necessary. Your audience needed a Google Docs system, then you made it. Great. That is an excellent example of meeting your audience where you're at, which is my final point in the recommendations, and I'll get back to it. Know your audience, use the right tool. But if you can use an existing tool, use an existing system. And if it's not really what you need, advocate for its improvement. Right now I'm trying to advocate with iNaturalist to add alerts into the anomaly detected system to make all of our lives easier. What if the anomaly detector system emailed you when it detected an anomaly? I don't think it does that right now, or at least I couldn't figure it out. That would be really cool. I don't need to build a whole new thing for that. I just need iNaturalist to eventually build that into their own system. I want to just advocate for that small bit of improvement that would make everybody's life a little easier when they use the anomaly detection system that's still under development. Passive data is actually also a really interesting place for data sovereignty. People are not aware that their data could be used for invasive species detection, control, management. They may not know in some places there are actual legal and physical implications that if they report this insect on their tree, somebody's going to come and cut down their tree. That's actually possible. So you've got to be incredibly careful with data sovereignty issues. What are the legal implications? what are the social dimensions of what might happen with the use of passive data, and also cultural sensitivities that are really important. Perhaps something comes up in, a conflict between different landowners. You may have lots of different types of problems with what is perceived as an invasive species versus what is not perceived as an invasive species. What about a culturally important food or an adopted culturally important food over time that is also an invasive species? These things get really complicated. So people will not know when you use a passive data approach that some of their data has these implications, because that is the nature of passive data collection and use. And so you've got to create sideboards to respect that reality of passive data. Let's see, I think it was Lawrence Gunther who was talking about earlier about how data quality and perceptions of data quality is really important. There are some people who report fake invasive species observations because they like to waste other people's times or make fun of government workers. Those people are not helpful to any of us. That also runs the spectrum all the way to the perception that perhaps anglers like to exaggerate the size of fish. Well, that's not useful either, and also probably an outdated notion. That's just my personal opinion. Photographs of species can be taken one place and then driven in a car, hundreds of miles before you post them to the internet, and then maybe you get a little lazy or neglectful about marking that they were taken here, but posted to the internet there. That has to be part of what you understand in your data and you take into account. It should not negate the utility of using that data. Understand what happens to it. What are the pluses and minuses? What are the mistakes that sneak in? What are the bad actors that do weird things? What about museum specimens mucking up your data? All of that stuff happens, especially with a passive approach. So you've got to take that variability, build it into your head, build a safeguard that helps you understand, should this data go to a verification system before we use it? Or is it good enough as it is? Should we have a flagging system for verification so that some of the observations that seem dicey get flagged before they move? Whatever it is, create systems, have them be nimble enough to change. Try not to create too many cry wolf moments, because that's not going to help anybody. Be smart about it. And again, know your audience. That goes both directions. The audience of the general public, that 97% of people who probably don't really know what invasive species are, and in the short term, you're not going to be the one to teach them it. You still want that audience to be useful to you, because there's so many of them out there. And some of them love to garden, or they, have seasonal work near agricultural areas that potentially could have invasive species. That makes those people so useful to you, even if they have no idea what they're looking at. And using the right tool for the job in that spectrum of tools, whether it's all the way at the right at automated email alerts, or closer to the left at person-to-person contact, talking about invasive species in a vest with a clipboard, and somebody says, hey, I saw that in my backyard the other day. That right tool for the job is crucially important, because we've got to do all the things. And our paper about using curiosity is about reminding all of us that there is this untapped, massive potential, 3 million observations a month in the United States, that we could all be doing better to use and be protecting natural resources, biodiversity, and our own relationship to our work better if we actually tapped into those observations in a respectful and appropriate way with the safeguards in place. So I'm just going to remind you again, if you're like, oh, but we need to teach people about invasive species, 100%, of course we do. I mean, that's how we all got here, right? But in the next month, in the next year, in the next 2 years, the incremental amount that you can teach about invasive species is important and valid and necessary, and dwarfed by the fact that that 97% of the pie chart is not you. It's not me. It's not the people that go to your training. It's everybody else. Some sort of person who just loves lizards and has pet lizards at home and sees a cool gecko on a fire alarm is just as important to you as an invasive species professional as somebody who actually knows all the geckos of the world and automatically assumes that this one is an invasive species, which by the way it was, but they're very common, so it's okay because they're extensively mapped in that area. Now, I don't want you all to take the wrong message from this, because sometimes when we talk about this paper and we talk about this concept, they say, oh, so should we not be using some of these tools? Oh, absolutely not. We absolutely should be using these tools, because as soon as invasive species become part of the working environment of our day-to-day, as soon as they're identified, that first point of contact might be with the general public. But after that, the invasive species world wakes up. Once we find the first northern giant hornet, how are we going to track additional potential northern giant hornets? How are we going to attract more Joro spiders? Well, it's going to come down to enthusiasts like us doing amazing work, helping us get the job done. And a lot of them go through EdMaps, and that's great. Or they go through iNaturalist projects, which is wonderful. And harnessing that enthusiasm for known issues. How are they moving? Where are they popping up next? How can we best manage them? So, so, so important. But before we knew that spotted lanternfly existed in an invasive species context in North America, before we knew that box tree moth was on our continent, that wasn't going to be in EdMaps. Those things weren't going to be in there. There's a time and a place for each tool. So you need to know not only your audience, but also the world of invasive species is too diverse in order to capture with only invasive species reporting tools. Complement your invasive species reporting tools. Do not replace them, is the thing that I really want to get across. So passive surveillance, the use of these tools like iNaturalist, like the biosecurity alerts, does not replace active surveillance for invasive species. It widens the surveillance net. It augments and broadens existing biosecurity frameworks. So while I'm out there photographing caterpillars and putting them onto iNaturalist projects or EdMaps Pro within a repeated observation system of cool caterpillars, and that's great and important. My sister is out there, and every time she decides that she wants to put a cool bug that she saw on a sunflower into iNaturalist, that data could be scraped up by somebody who is doing research on invasive species of, backyard plants. And my sister doesn't even need to know that. She can just be contributing to science by just being excited about bugs on her plants. And so I just want you all to think about, she might send me that picture, which is great, but if she just posts it to iNaturalist because she really just enjoys posting things to iNaturalist, that is equally great if we're ready for her observation as a community. So I was hoping to leave some time for discussion. I think I hit the mark on timing, which is honestly a small miracle. And I want to leave this with one of my co-authors, and just in the same vein as me and my sister being part of the conversation here, Dave was the first person to give a presentation to a big group on this paper, and he used a picture of his mom with Joro spider. And so I thought I would kind of make you all laugh with, so this is Dave's left hand holding the Asian longhorn beetle. He lives right near the relatively right near the South Carolina infestation of Asian longhorn beetles. That's one of the first ever Asian longhorn beetles found within that infestation when they were doing the original delimitation. And since then, also his mother has learned to apparently be delighted by the presence of Joro spiders in their very backyard. And there you have it. My email is in green. If you would like me to directly email you a copy of this presentation with all the citations and links in it, please email me a short note to that effect. And then you can also reach Amanda and Dave as necessary. And now we are open for discussion.
Thank you so much, Leigh, for that awesome presentation. I haven't had any questions come into the Q&A yet, but there's been a ton of discussion in the chat. So
I've been trying to ignore it so that I wasn't so distracted, but we can just talk through it if that's good.
Yeah, of course. I love that. There was a lot of really great, I would say, examples given, ideas, new things, thank yous, great advice. So yes, I will kind of scroll through, and while I'm doing that, I'll also share that Leigh's presentation it was recorded and will be shared on our YouTube channel as well after the forum. So you'll be able to watch it again if you missed anything. Okay.
I'm scrolling up. Oh my gosh, these are amazing.
Lots of hype for the INOT subscription alert.
Okay, well, we're gonna laugh because the very first one is Amanda saying, "Hi, Leigh." So yes, my co-author Amanda is on there. So if any questions come up for her, hopefully she can type in the chat. And
Yeah.
then, yeah. So Jen Form,
Questions coming in now too, Leigh, if maybe I could take those first.
yeah, whatever you prefer, Mackenzie. It's
Sure.
your show.
So I just have a question from Chris Lee. What are your thoughts about crediting and attributing INAT observers?
So INAT is a self-policing online community similar to Reddit. And um, they use the Creative Commons system, which is part of the internet community. And I think the fact that they do a very good job of trying to have identifiers and systems, self-correcting systems, as well as photo credit systems, is quite a model of best practices. There are some other internet sites that don't do all of those self-policing behaviors. And so while INAT is never going to be perfect because nobody is perfect and no system is perfect, I think they actually do a nice job with identifiers and so forth. The one limit to that I would say is that we do have a reality of regulatory significance, both in Canada, the United States, and elsewhere. And so pests that are kind of hard to tell apart and are of regulatory significance, especially if they're found in a new place, that's a separate question of legal identification by the local regulatory authorities. And that's where things get trickier.
Awesome, thank you, Leigh. Is there any research on when during the invasion curve we can expect to see INAT sightings come in, early or too late?
I think that's an amazing question. And I think just to keep hitting that hard, if we limit ourselves to surveillance systems by only 3% of the population, we will end up later on the curve. If we open ourselves up to trying to find the vast majority of the natural world through that 97% of people, the best possible scenario is we will get those detections sooner on the curve. We will never hit perfection. This is a massive world. Global trade continues to expand every day. Enforcement of global trade regulations is not always ideal. By using all the tools available to us, especially by using tools that just capitalize on curiosity and interest and just the excitement in the natural world, whatever we get will probably be the best possible scenario, even if it's not perfect.
Awesome, thanks, Leigh. That was all that came through for questions in the Q&A. But I will just add quickly, because I think we have a couple minutes, just an ISC anecdote, I guess. We recently ran an iNaturalist contest on beach leaf disease in the fall, which we're kind of, the fall's kind of an odd time. Maybe we wouldn't get that great of uptake, but we were actually able to get a new detection in a new county in Ontario that wasn't picked up otherwise. So we kind of made big progress in just a short couple month campaign that was just put out kind of passively through our social medias. And we got really great response from the people that were involved as well, saying it really, the idea of having this contest, yeah, you win, like we gave a little mug as a prize or whatever and some community science stuff, but it just encouraged them to get out and be looking at the trees in their backyard and the trails they're out on anyways, walking their pets and things. So just those little things can kind of pique people's interests as well.
Oh, 100%. And I see, I'm scrolling through the chat and trying not to get too distracted by all the exciting ideas people have. But Angela Gupta mentioned how this also is one of the ways that you can help people better cope with their eco-anxieties. When they engage with things like bio blitzes or things like being told everything you want to observe and put on iNaturalist is important. Like, don't tell them you should only observe one thing as your top line message. Tell them you want to know everything they're excited about. And also, if you happen to see this one thing, make sure to take a good picture of it, right? So start broad, empower them, get them to feel really engaged. And then if you do have a target species, work that in.
Yes, definitely. Amanda added into the chat, new invasive records will typically show up on INAT before other places.
Yeah, so our numbers, yes, thank you, Amanda, for reminding me of that fact. Our numbers very clearly show when we were researching the paper itself that because of the numerical supremacy of iNaturalist, observations of first in county, first in state, first in province, first across whatever will almost always show up with INAT first. And that is not because INAT is special, it is because it's a behemoth. So if we used a different app, like now I'm forgetting, in Europe, they have another app they use quite a bit beyond iNaturalist. Amanda will probably put it in the chat. Their observations might show up there first because that app is just the most commonly used one. But now I can't remember the name of it. But iNaturalist is actually very commonly used across the world. It is, I think, the dominant natural observation platform of the whole world at this point.
Yeah, thank you, Leigh. We find it quite helpful and not just our invasive species surveillance, but we've been looking at hosts as well.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, one of the comments in the chat, I just wanted to reiterate because I'm thrilled it was said. Jeff Flory says, this is yes and that's exactly what I want everybody to take from this presentation. Your existing methods are good and important and necessary and useful and should continue to be funded and effort put into them. Every one of these things is great. And we are currently underutilizing the world of passive surveillance. And we can do better, and the systems exist if we all choose to engage in there and bring in somebody who can use, our statistical package and figure that out. Bring in somebody who's really good at using the iNaturalist platform to create what you want for your work. That's the message that I think I want you all to take home is yes, and let's do this too, because it's so cool and it empowers people, like Angela said.
Amanda said he thinks it's observation.org.
Yeah, totally. Thank you. So that was the other one. Observation.org is really commonly used in Europe, but they also use iNaturalist. So it's just a good example that you have to know your audience is. If you're trying to use a platform that isn't commonly used, for instance, if you went and did work for a few years in France, maybe you would want to do all of this on observation.org.
And one question that came in from Jillian towards the end here that I think is a good question for the group. Are there any ideas you have on how to break through the algorithms to reach the other 97% better?
When we talk about algorithms, I'm guessing you're talking about things like Instagram and Facebook. And I would say that programs that engage people that already have a toe in the door. So maybe they're excited about the Great Backyard Bird Count. Maybe they're excited about gardening. That's close enough. You will have better results if you start with those sort of, in Canada, do you guys ever joke about 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon? Is that a thing? Or do you not know what I'm talking about? Yeah, okay.
I know what you're talking about.
Okay, so if you think about,
yes as well.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Megan. Oh my gosh, it's funny that some of my colleagues are online watching me do this. So if you think about 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, right? Like 2 degrees out is an avid bird watcher. But the thing is that they're going to be so easy to encourage to go to a BioBlitz. They have binoculars. They're excited about birds. When they see a weird butterfly, there's a really good chance they'll put it on iNaturalist. So I think we can't get to the full 97%, but we can get to the 2 degrees or 3 degrees of Kevin Bacon person out there that might, hunters are a great example. They notice a lot. They may not typically be our target audience, but man, they could be pretty easily told to put cool observations on iNaturalist and then just let it go. Don't talk about the rest of it because they're out there looking at things, getting excited about things. with their family.
Yeah, I think there's so many different audiences that we have the potential to break into in our world, I think. One kind of recent one that's come up for me is bonsai growers with citrus longhorn beetle. So that's something that we're looking to do continued outreach on because we did have a detection in Ontario recently. So we want to work with the CFIA to increase outreach on this, which bonsai growers, we would have never thought to do outreach on that initially, right? Because it's not a typical audience that we do outreach with, but it's a very important audience for that one species.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think one of the things that I really took home from this is that I automatically go to a place of like, oh yeah, bonsai growers, we should show them ed maps. And then I have to remember, no. Don't go that far. Don't ask them to take steps that are unrealistic for them. Ask them to do things that are closer to home. And that's that know your audience. If you tell people to do things that they're just grossly unlikely to do, you haven't made a lot of good progress. So if you tell people to do things that they want to do and you just reinforce how important it is, you're going to make a lot more progress.
Yeah, for sure. I have another question that came in too, Leigh. Sadia said, are there any efforts to harmonize the various types of collection methods or work that highlights the challenges of doing this? I'm thinking an AI program could do this potentially.
So in the United States, just a few months ago, there was a new harmonization scheme unrolled. It's called Siren. I actually don't remember what that acronym stands for, but it's SIREN, like it sounds. And that is an attempt to collate and harmonize detection information across different platforms. I am not aware of a similar effort taking place in Canada. I am also not aware of the current status of Siren. But to the question's point, data is only useful if it reaches the people that need it in a regularized, rational system. When things get too sporadic, our attention gets pulled in too many places. That's why I'm a big fan of things like email alerts. If my attention is put into my inbox, I'm much more likely to remember to do something than if I have to remember to go to iNaturalist or remember to go here. That's hard for us as professionals because we have so many responsibilities. So Mackenzie just put in the Siren program. Thank you so much, Mackenzie, into the chat. So if you'd like to look at that US-based system that is attempting to harmonize detection-based information across all the different entities, I highly recommend you check it out, see what you think, see if maybe Canada does or does not want a similar infrastructure idea to move forward.
Thank you very much for sharing that, Leigh. I know I'm interested. I'm sure many others are as well.
Yeah, it's quite brand new. I actually don't honestly know if it works very well yet. That's I don't know. But I do know that they started unrolling the beginning of it in October and November.
Okay, awesome. That'll definitely be good for us to check out. Okay, there's a couple minutes left, Leigh, and I think I've addressed all the questions. I please still recommend you read through the chat because there's a lot of really great comments and info there. Can try to get someone to save it on our end if we want to send it your way as well. But yeah, lots of great talks there and that. And I will mention that we topped out this session at 325 participants.
Congratulations, everybody. That's amazing. Thanks for coming to the talk.
Thanks to everyone for joining us. And thanks to Leigh for coming and sharing that awesome presentation. I know it was really beneficial for me, and based on the chat, it was for everybody else too. And thanks again for your great storytelling and for sharing yours, Amanda's, and Dave's work.
Thank you so much. And thanks for Amanda for being on there to help me out when I forgot stuff. And being the lead author on the publication. It was a team effort.
Okay, thanks, Leigh. We'll talk soon. And for everybody else staying on, we got some horizon scanning going on this afternoon. So we'll have a bit of a break and then you can hop on to the next session and we'll see you there.
Thank you.